United Kingdom has been plunged into one of its most dramatic political crises in decades as growing public anger, economic uncertainty, and government mismanagement have spiraled into mass demonstrations calling for a snap general election, leaving King Charles III facing a constitutional dilemma that has trapped the monarchy in the storm of politics. Crowds in major cities from London to Manchester have taken to the streets, waving banners that read "Democracy Now" and "End the Chaos," accusing the ruling government of clinging to power despite losing legitimacy in the eyes of the people. The Prime Minister, who has been battling cabinet resignations, deep party infighting, and the collapse of public trust, continues to insist that the government can survive until the next scheduled election, but the pressure has reached a boiling point. For King Charles, who traditionally remains above the political fray, the crisis has become inescapable, as calls for him to intervene or push for fresh elections grow louder, sparking intense debates about the constitutional role of the monarch in a modern democracy. The political deadlock has also revived painful memories of Britain's historical instability, echoing the turbulent years of the 1970s when governments fell in rapid succession and the monarchy was dragged into the public spotlight, a situation the current king had hoped to avoid at all costs. Behind the escalating demands for change lies a deep economic crisis that has battered households across the nation, leaving millions struggling with rising food prices, soaring energy bills, and collapsing public services. The government's failure to stabilize the economy has eroded confidence not just in its leadership but in the entire political establishment, with analysts warning that Britain faces a dangerous combination of financial instability and institutional breakdown. Unemployment has begun to creep upward, inflation remains stubbornly high, and key industries are warning of strikes and walkouts as workers demand relief from a cost-of-living emergency that shows no signs of easing. Polls indicate that trust in political leaders has fallen to historic lows, with more than two-thirds of Britons now saying they believe an immediate general election is the only solution to restore accountability. Protesters outside Downing Street have accused the Prime Minister of sitting in office without a mandate, pointing to the ruling party's crumbling support and the opposition's surging popularity as proof that the public is ready for a change. The atmosphere has become so volatile that police forces have been placed on high alert, with security officials warning that tensions could spiral into widespread unrest if the government continues to resist public demands. King Charles, who ascended the throne following the death of Queen Elizabeth II, now faces the most serious challenge of his reign as questions swirl about whether he can remain neutral while the country teeters on the brink of political collapse. Constitutional experts argue that while the monarch does not hold executive power, he does serve as the ultimate guarantor of political stability, meaning his silence in the face of a collapsing government risks being interpreted as complicity. At the same time, any overt move to push for an election would shatter the fragile line between monarchy and politics, potentially damaging the institution for generations. Royal aides have described the king as deeply troubled by the crisis, holding daily consultations with senior advisors and seeking assurances that the parliamentary system can resolve the chaos without requiring royal intervention. Yet leaks from palace insiders suggest that frustration is mounting, with Charles reportedly concerned that the government's refusal to act responsibly is dragging the crown into an unwanted confrontation with the will of the people. International observers, meanwhile, are watching closely, with headlines across Europe and America warning that Britain's famed democratic stability is crumbling under the weight of political arrogance and economic despair. As the days stretch into weeks with no resolution, Britain finds itself caught between a government determined to cling to power, a public united in its demand for change, and a monarch trapped in a constitutional crisis that threatens to redefine his role. Calls for mass strikes, civil disobedience, and nationwide protests are growing louder, while opposition leaders are sharpening their attacks, branding the Prime Minister unfit to govern and warning that the longer the crisis drags on, the greater the damage to Britain's global standing. Investors are beginning to retreat, sending shockwaves through financial markets and weakening the pound as fears of prolonged instability rattle confidence in the UK economy. Diplomats privately warn that Britain's international credibility is at stake, with allies concerned that domestic chaos could weaken its ability to act decisively on foreign policy, trade, and security. For King Charles, the stakes could not be higher. If he remains silent, he risks being remembered as the monarch who watched passively as Britain unraveled, but if he intervenes, he risks politicizing the monarchy in a way that could ignite fresh controversy about the very future of the crown. What began as a political dispute has now escalated into a full-blown national reckoning, with the fate of the government, the stability of the country, and the future of the monarchy hanging in the balance as Britain stares into the abyss of uncertainty. The crisis has also exposed deep divisions within the ruling party itself, as MPs openly rebel against the leadership, with whispers of no-confidence letters and plots to replace the Prime Minister intensifying by the hour. Cabinet resignations have left gaping holes in the government, with several high-ranking ministers stepping down in protest over what they call a failure to listen to the public's demands. Inside Parliament, debates have turned chaotic, with opposition members accusing the government of clinging to power in defiance of democratic principles, while loyalists insist that stability can only be preserved if the current administration sees through its mandate. Yet with every passing day, the reality of collapsing authority becomes harder to deny, and the government's inability to control the narrative only strengthens the opposition's argument that Britain is being governed by a party in denial. Analysts note that the political drama unfolding in Westminster has now reached a point of no return, with the legitimacy of the current administration fatally undermined, raising serious doubts about whether it can govern effectively even if it manages to hold on to power a little longer. Public anger has reached fever pitch, with protest movements gaining momentum across the country and ordinary Britons joining marches, rallies, and demonstrations at a scale not seen since the anti-austerity protests of the early 2010s. Trade unions, student groups, and grassroots organizations have united under a common demand: a new election to reset the political landscape. The mood in these gatherings is one of frustration but also determination, as people share stories of struggling to pay heating bills, watching public hospitals buckle under pressure, and seeing once proud industries crumble due to government inaction. In Scotland and Wales, the crisis has reignited debates about independence and devolution, with leaders arguing that Westminster's inability to govern effectively shows why regions must have more control over their own futures. Even within England, local leaders are voicing alarm, saying their communities are being abandoned while national politicians remain consumed by infighting. Social media has amplified the outrage, with viral hashtags calling for the Prime Minister's resignation, and footage of massive crowds surrounding government buildings being shared globally, further damaging Britain's international reputation. For King Charles, the political firestorm poses not just a constitutional challenge but also a personal test of leadership in the early years of his reign. Unlike his late mother, who enjoyed decades of public loyalty and carefully maintained political neutrality, Charles ascended the throne in a time of turbulence, with public skepticism about the monarchy's relevance already simmering. His attempts to modernize the institution and present himself as a monarch attuned to the needs of ordinary people are now being overshadowed by the crisis, with critics warning that if he appears powerless in the face of such turmoil, the monarchy's standing could suffer irreparable damage. On the other hand, supporters argue that restraint is his strongest weapon, that by avoiding any direct involvement he protects the crown from accusations of partisanship. Yet the optics are increasingly difficult. Television images of a weary monarch arriving at Buckingham Palace as protesters chant for change outside Parliament highlight the uncomfortable reality that the king is being dragged into the nation's political reckoning whether he likes it or not. Diplomats close to the palace suggest that Charles is acutely aware of this risk, and is quietly preparing for the possibility that his constitutional role may be tested in ways unseen in modern times. The international dimension of the crisis cannot be ignored, as Britain's allies and rivals alike watch the turmoil unfold with a mixture of concern and opportunism. In Brussels, European Union officials have privately expressed alarm that Britain's political paralysis could derail key negotiations on trade, security, and cooperation. In Washington, policymakers are worried that a distracted UK may struggle to fulfill its commitments on NATO defense spending and global diplomacy. Meanwhile, adversaries such as Russia and China are seizing on the instability, with state media outlets portraying Britain as a nation in decline, incapable of managing its own affairs. Economists warn that if the crisis continues unchecked, foreign investment will shrink, further weakening the pound and driving up borrowing costs for households and businesses. The City of London, once seen as a pillar of global financial stability, now faces questions about its resilience under political chaos, with investors shifting billions abroad as a hedge against prolonged instability. All of this places additional pressure on the government to resolve the crisis quickly, but with the Prime Minister refusing to call elections, the opposition demanding immediate change, and the King trapped in a constitutional bind, Britain finds itself caught in a dangerous stalemate that could reshape its democracy and institutions for generations to come.